Hello everyone, I'm delighted to welcome you all from across the globe to our Wireless Global Congress Summer Webinar Series. My name is Sarah Markham and I'll be your host today for the webinar. So for today's webinar, we're going to be talking about open roaming, automatic and secure Wi-Fi everywhere for everyone. And today we're going to deep dive into the opportunities for businesses and how open roaming enables that vital scaling. We'll be explaining how it works and the different ways organisations and enterprises can get involved. We'll look at how open roaming bridges the worlds of Wi-Fi and cellular and converges together. And we'll be also very delighted to welcome Matt McPherson to lead a panel on how convergence drives the need for new roaming and business models. So first of all, I would like to start by introducing Tiago Rodriguez. Tiago is a long-term advocate of Wi-Fi, and he's passionate about driving the industry forward, working with members and collaborating with external organisations. He has been personally responsible for overseeing the growth of Wi-Fi roaming and has been instrumental in the conception of WBA OpenRoaming as a growth engine for business. So a warm welcome to Tiago Rodriguez.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah, for the introduction. A big welcome to everyone. One more webinar from the Wireless Broadband Alliance. Today I have the fortune to talk about one of my favorite topics. So I will talk about public Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi roaming. I still remember my initial days on the Wi-Fi roaming back in 2003 with a couple of other service providers. We worked closely with the Intel group. I'm pretty sure that some of Intel folks will be on the call. So if you guys recall, there was a project called IRAP. And we started just half a dozen people in a room trying to make Wi-Fi roaming works right in the beginning when Intel started to ship the Intel Centrino chipset. So was lots of fun. And I recall as well with lots of joy the first commercial agreement that in fact I did with my good friend Angelos from Deutsche Telekom. I believe he's going to be on this webinar as well. So we did the first roaming agreement for the 2004 European Football Cup that it happened in Portugal. Unfortunately, Portugal didn't win the championship, but we did the first roaming agreement and we deployed Wi-Fi in large stadiums in collaboration with UEFA, that is the European Football Association, and was a great experience. But let me spend a few minutes, for those of you that are not so familiar with the Alliance, let me spend a few minutes just to introduce you WBA, so the Wireless Broadband Alliance. We are long-time advocates of interoperability between Wi-Fi networks. Our vision is about seamless and interoperable services experience on Wi-Fi within the global wireless ecosystem. So we really want to make sure that Wi-Fi delivers a secure, seamless, and interoperable experience. And like any other trade association, we develop collaboration among our members, so the service providers, the technology companies, other industry bodies. So we try to enable that collaboration, and for that we develop different types of programs and projects, either to address a problem or to accelerate one opportunity that we identified. In terms of priorities, as I said, automatically secure and interoperable Wi-Fi roaming is one of our top priorities. This was the reason why this organization was founded back in 2003, beginning of 2003. So has been a long time goal of the Alliance, but as well, we have been focusing on accelerating the next generation of Wi-Fi networks. So we really try to accelerate adoption of any type of feature, any type of standards that can help to improve the quality and the experience of Wi-Fi to all of us as consumers. At the same time, we do a lot of work on convergence and coexistence of Wi-Fi with other wireless technologies. And I always give this example, making 5G and Wi-Fi 6 not competitors, but the best friends. And in fact, Sherman Pai, on our webinar last Wednesday, we talked about this. How can these two worlds, the licensed technology world and the unlicensed technology world, we can somehow make some bridges and create opportunities that all of us as consumers who can benefit from that, both worlds coming together. Just a quick snapshot of our membership. So good for everyone to understand who are the companies behind WBA. So you can see we have a robust group of operators and service providers, but as well technology providers. And you can see companies on our board from all over the globe, and a good mix of large operators, specific Wi-Fi operators, chipset manufacturers, equipment manufacturers from all different regions of the world. I think it has been a very good mix and enables us to have a global perspective. Okay, so after this short introduction to WBA, and of course, if you'd like to know more about WBA, please feel free to send me a message or go to our website and drop a message. If you are not a member, you should consider to be, and I hope that after today's session, open roaming can be one more reason for you to consider to join. But let's talk about now public Wi-Fi, and I want to start by sharing some of the issues that all of us as consumers we face on our day-to-day when we connect to Wi-Fi. We always have this question, so is this Wi-Fi secure, yes or no? Can I don't know, do my shopping or look into my bank account when I'm in an hotel or if I'm in a coffee shop or supermarket? So that's always that somehow let's say there is a ghost always behind the public Wi-Fi that people doesn't know if it's secure or not. So that's definitely an issue. The other issue that I want to highlight is the user experience. So we as consumers, we have a lot of pain connecting to Wi-Fi. So sometimes people ask me to watch a video, sometimes they ask me for a password, sometimes they ask me to register, sometimes they ask for my social media account to connect, other times they make me send an SMS to some place. So it's really a very painful situation, and I need to guess and try to ask someone which SSID I need to connect, and then I have to do all these things, sometimes long password that I need to type in. So definitely user experience is a pain. Then is the quality of service. I will make a comparison with the movie from Tom Hanks, the Forrest Gump. Wi-Fi is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you are going to get until you connect. And you can be on the most fancy venue in the world, but you can have a bad experience on Wi-Fi, or you can have the opposite. And it's something really that sometimes is very annoying and creates lots of frustration. And the last issue is a more complex issue that is related with the deployment. So those type of venues that they try to, I don't know, cover a free stores or hotel or a large restaurant, they try to cover the entire venue just with one AP, or people buy a $20 AP and they expect that they can connect 1,000 people to the same AP. So that's create, and I believe there is a gap as well in terms of education on the capacity and coverage of the Wi-Fi. So having these four problems in mind, I wanted even to deep dive a little bit more. And this brings a very fragmented experience. So sometimes we go to, I don't know, meet some customer or a potential partner, one of our suppliers, or anywhere, even a coffee shop. We go to these different venues and we ask for the Wi-Fi, and people likes to give these yellow papers. And I can share from my experience, I meet a lot of people all the time, and I had very important meetings with very important companies, very big brands, and at the end of the day, they give you, they make millions, but many times they give you these yellow paper with a password, many times a very awkward password, and I think that's very challenging and it's very fragmented. Or some other times we go to all these locations and we are sharing a password, and people say, "Oh yes, my Wi-Fi, we have a password," but they don't say that they are sharing the password with 50,000 people, 10,000 people, 1,000 people, whatever number of people that is coming there. So that's a challenge as well. And then open access, that I even, in my mind, I can share my personal views, are the most honest. So okay, I don't have any type of security, just connect. I want to make as simple as possible. And this is very challenging and creates, as you can imagine, a lot of frustration and confusion. So both to the users and all of us as consumers, but as well to the authorities and policymakers. And I'm just pick up from the internet some news from, and I tried to select some relevant media companies, so you can see. So people, why you should never use Wi-Fi in airports? Why FBI is telling whatever people there is problems with Wi-Fi? And you have, like, at least in large newspapers telling, okay, what are the dangers, the hidden dangers of Wi-Fi? And all these news, by the way, are recent. Is over, all of them from 2019 or late 2019. I think there is one from early 19, but this is recent. This is what we are getting because of not to solving this issue of public Wi-Fi. This is the frustration, confusing that we are making into the market. And the funny part is that we have many of these solutions that can tackle this, but somehow there is some strange and hidden force that is not enable us to solve it once and for all. We try to solve, and I've been part of this journey. I've been working on public Wi-Fi, as I said, for the last 20 years almost, and I implemented many of these solutions that I'm sharing here, but we try to solve it in a very isolated way. So sometimes we ask passwords, registration to people to share the social media, asking SMSs to get connected and all that. I think you can say that is better than having a shared password or no password at all, but we are not making the life of the consumers much easier, and we are not solving the 4 problems that I identified in the beginning. And that's where I think we need to join forces. And I think it's time that the Wi-Fi industry, we turn the page and we make the public guest Wi-Fi experience really simple and secure to everyone. And I think open roaming can be a solution. So let me introduce you what's open roaming and the goals that open roaming wants to achieve. So open roaming is a global cloud Wi-Fi roaming federation that wants to enable an automatic and secure Wi-Fi experience everywhere. It's based in such a way that we want to standardize, is a standard framework for all the organizations to be able to be part of it, regardless if you are a large service provider, or if you are one convention center, or if you are one airport, or even if you are a small coffee shop that you just want to provide access to your customers. And really what we want to accomplish is we want to improve that user experience in a secure way for any public guest Wi-Fi network. We want to grow the number of networks that are interconnected and that they can talk to each other. So they are not in isolation. They are not lots of islands that they don't talk to each other. We need to make that bridge so everyone can talk with everyone. We need to accelerate, and we want to make this universal onboarding of devices. So we need to solve once and for all the onboarding of devices. The connection should be not a problem. And of course, we want to develop, on top of open roaming, a very healthy ecosystem of innovative services that any company, including probably many of you that are on this webinar, that you can develop a business on top of open roaming. The connectivity and get connected to the network is just a small step to provide a very vast and large set of additional services that can be done by all of you. And by the way, multiple business models can be applied to Wi-Fi roaming and to open roaming, either free access, paid access, sponsored access. A mix of all these methods can be executed on top of open roaming. And really, my ambition, as I shared on Wednesday, I would like to see open roaming becoming the visa for Wi-Fi. Of course, this is not about Thiago, but this is about all of us that are worried about public Wi-Fi and we want to improve the reputation and the quality of Wi-Fi, that we join forces. And as I said, the visa doesn't matter wherever I go. If I go to a 5-star hotel, or if I go to a small coffee shop, or if I go to a food truck, I have a Visa card. Doesn't matter if it's gold, silver, or the most basic Visa card, I can pay. And I can get whatever services I want from that service provider. And that's what we should try to do with open roaming. And I believe the members of WBA have that ambition to make open roaming the visa for Wi-Fi. Let me spend one more few time on here talking about how does open roaming work. And by the way, we'll have other presentations with much more detailed information from my colleague Bruno, but as well from my friends Chris Bruce and Derek Patterson. Really, open roaming wants to bridge two worlds. There is one world of networks, Wi-Fi networks, and those you can see here on the right side of the screen. We have the service providers, the operators, but we have the hotels, we have the convention centers, airports, universities, schools, all those locations. They are a big community of networks. And then on the other side, we have all the identity providers. The most common, as you know, it's the service providers, the operators. Either if you are a mobile operator and you can use your SIM card, or you are a cable operator, an ISP. But we can see a lot of other identity providers embracing open roaming. All those brands that they have loyalty programs, an airline, one hotel chain, a supermarket, anyone. They already have your information. They can easily, directly or with the help of someone, they can create an identity that can be used in open roaming. Any device manufacturer or chipset manufacturer, or even cloud software manufacturer, they can create easily and provide based on the information that they already have from their customers, provide a service that works on open roaming. And the same with an internet provider or social media provider. And really, open roaming wants to bridge these two worlds together. Of course, we can say there is multiple players with different business models, different sizes. But after today's presentation, and once you start to see more details in the following presentations, you'll start to see that there is room for everyone. Of course, the model and the way that they get involved in open roaming will be different. So will be very different if a big brand like I don't know, Walmart or Hilton Hotels or a big airline company joins open roaming, or a large mobile operator, the way that they join open roaming will be different the way that a small coffee shop will join. So probably the small coffee shop will not join directly open roaming. They will use either their equipment manufacturer or even an IT company that will provide whatever type of service required for them to join the federation. While if you are a large operator or a large service provider, you can join directly open roaming and be part of open roaming due to your size and footprint that you have. So I hope you will enjoy this session today, because we really want to deep dive in terms of all the benefits and how you can be part of open roaming. And to be honest, I believe open roaming can solve the four issues that I presented. I think three of them, it's very simple and is a no-brainer for open roaming. And the fourth one is just a question of time. I think when we talk about open roaming, security is there. So one of the elements that you are going to see, one of the elements of open roaming is Passpoint. So Passpoint is a technology that guarantees that all the communication between the device and the network is secure. So there is no middle in the man attacks, or there is no fake SSIDs that can somehow be played in that scenarios. The same with the user experience. So the user experience, and once more based on Passpoint and the roaming consortium codes that WBA register on the proper authorities, this pain of guessing the SSID and the pain of being able to know the password for all different types of hotspots and register every time that I go to connect somewhere, that is going away. And basically the device will know automatically which networks to connect and if we have the right credential to connect to that network. And the same for the quality of service. One of the elements that you are going to hear about is the ability to provide some level of policy. When we developed the open roaming, we took this in consideration. We know that not all the networks are equal. So we can use, based on the mechanism that we developed for the roaming consortium codes that identify the different networks, we can do policy and we can do selection. We can have scenarios where there is one open roaming specific code for best effort type of networks, but we can as well develop premium service. And people knows that when they got into that subset of open roaming, they know that the quality will be there. And then we can even play more. We can even do it by specific verticals, if it's education, or if it's hospitality, or if it's any other vertical or enterprise segment that we want to explore. And the last issue that I identified, the deployment, I think will be solved over time. Because once all of us as consumers, we start to be able to connect automatically everywhere, we feel secure, we know when we have quality and when we don't have, definitely we are going to start to complain why your network is not equal to your competitors, because I come from another restaurant or from another hotel that they provide open roaming in a super and fantastic way with perfect quality. And over time, I think that will help to educate the market to deploy better and more consistent Wi-Fi. So I hope that this short presentation open up your appetite for a great webinar today, that you got to know a little bit more about the problems that we want to solve with open roaming. And I will finish with this sentence: let's join forces and make open roaming the visa for Wi-Fi. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm now open for any questions that any of you may have.
Thank you, Tiago. I think there's lots of exciting opportunities ahead for the whole industry here. So we have got a couple of questions for you. So let me just start with one to do with the enterprises. So how can small, medium enterprises and small coffee shops or restaurants even benefit from open roaming and create a business out of it?
Yeah, very interesting question. So I think any owner of a coffee shop or of a restaurant or any other kind of public access type of business that is open to the public, they need to think, first of all, do they want to offer the Wi-Fi to their customers, or do they want to charge for the Wi-Fi? So that's the first decision that they have to make. And once they make that decision, they need then to decide, okay, so regardless of if I want to charge or not charge, okay, how can I have open roaming? So first, the recommendation from my side is to contact the company that deployed the Wi-Fi on their premises. So I'm pretty sure that either a service provider or an IT company or even directly equipment manufacturer, someone has put it a Wi-Fi router and a Wi-Fi APs on their facility. So first thing is to talk with them and say, look, I have all this equipment that is fantastic, but now I want to provide a secure and automatic experience to my customers, and I want to be part of open roaming. How can we do it? And if that company is already, and I will pick up now the example of Cisco, imagine that IT company is reselling Cisco equipment or any other manufacturer, but let's go with Cisco to make my friend Matt happy about it. So you just need to contact, in that case, Cisco and say, look, I have a customer who would like to have open roaming. And of course, if that customer, let's say he wants free access and he wants to provide free access to everyone because he monetizes indirectly, that's fine. So even easier. So we just need to select, okay, now that I have open roaming throughout my IT support company through Cisco, what are the identity providers that I want to allow to connect to my coffee shop? Do I allow everyone, or do I want to allow only the service providers and the identities from my country, from my neighbor countries, from the continent where I live, or I want to allow everyone to join my coffee shop and get access? This is for the free model. If they want to go with the paid model and monetize directly back the network, yeah, they need to contact and say, I want to whatever amount of money for my network. So any identity provider that would like to work with me, I'm here available. And if it's a small coffee shop, I recommend to talk with any roaming hub or interconnection player that can help to facilitate those dialogues with service providers and other identity providers.
Okay, there are a lot of questions here, and we're not going to be able to get to all of them, and I think some of them will be covered a little bit later in the presentation. So let me just ask this one. So open roaming is only for EAT authentication, or is it also open for open SSID portal type scenarios as well?
So let's put it this way. Open roaming, yes, is only for EAP authentication methods. And within the EAP authentication methods, you have multiple variations of EAP. You have the most common is the EAP SIM, so based on the SIM card of the service providers, but then you have EAP TTLS and EAP TLS. And based on EAP TTLS and TLS, anyone in the world, including myself, if I have my own business, and if I have the expertise, I could create a database of customers, I could create my brand loyalty program to my customers, and I could create an open roaming account that is one credential that could be distributed in devices, and then people could connect by using Tiago business account that they are from his coffee shop. And that's the beauty of open roaming. So it enables by one side large companies like the mobile carriers that they can use all those security methods based on the SIM card, but allows anyone that has a brand loyalty type of program, or even if they want to create one from zero, they can create and they can start distributing credentials to their customers.
Great. Well, Tiago, thank you very much. I'm going to pause it there. We have got some more questions for you, but I think we'll ask them a little bit later in the webinar.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah.
So now I'd like to introduce to you Bruno Thomas. He's our Director of the WBA programs. Bruno manages all the activities and working groups within the WBA that are focused on business development and implementation of wireless technologies. For those who know him, Bruno's passion for technology, industry collaboration and innovation is an inspiration. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Bruno Thomas. Bruno, I can't hear you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. Let me thank everyone joining us today. So really, I think this virtual event is raising our missing physical event. So I just keep wearing my badge, but that's just a thing for the initial stages. But yeah, so I think mainly on this presentation, I'll just provide a very brief overview of what WBA is doing currently in terms of enabling the members to collaborate. So in fact, I think the main point in terms of decoding open roaming is to just shed some light on how WBA is addressing it right now. So I would like just to present here a brief introduction in terms of how this lives in our WBA program in that sense. So this means that currently WBA, we are going to organize in work groups. We have work around next generation technologies, so being Wi-Fi generations coming to the certification program and being deployed. So we work across in home, in flight, new services like Wi-Fi sensing. On the 5G, we have some work on RAN conversions. Then you can see IoT, things like connected vehicle and integration with other unlicensed IoT technologies. Then naturally the roaming side, the testing interoperability, and then some specialty work groups like the policy and regulatory, the CTO group, and the certification. So I think the important is to say that open roaming, even though is a term that we are sharing as the technology to solve most of the issues that Tiago proposed, there are several groups and several teams contributing to this effort in the WBA. So by saying this, the end game of my presentation is just to invite you to collaborate with us. As Tiago mentioned, we need all the support, as many companies as possible implementing, and that's our drive. So I think it's important to say that we started working in these next generation hotspots, Wi-Fi roaming through rigs, hotspot to our pass points for the last 10 years. This is just one example on how working with our global partners and working with many of you here on the call, so between even Chris, Derek, and Matt on these NGH Live deployments in Mobile World Congress, it took us a number of years even to start achieving some mass scale. I think what's really positive is that eventually we can claim that 10GH become commercial. For instance, last event here in 2019, we had roughly 80% of users automatically connecting using a combination of Passpoint and rigs. But I think the members, what we did is to come together and still solve these two simple steps that could scale Wi-Fi roaming further and create a federation in the sense that we bridge the divide between different federations and we avoid fragmentation. So those steps were simplifying the partner discovery and onboarding and scaling interconnections and information exchange. To achieve this, we just come up with these roaming evolution modular building blocks. I think Tiago mentioned some of those, but I would just like to say that the roaming consortium codes is something really important for the partner discovery and applying policies. The WBA unique organization identifier that we are also introducing, and it was standardized with IANA, is something that all the companies, all the members will be able to leverage. And also evolving the way we interconnect networks through a certificate-based roaming schema using a public key infrastructure and RADSEC exchanges. So when we combine all of this, we start creating the open roaming framework. And first of all, we identify the players. So really to make this work, we needed all the ecosystem engaged, from the ecosystem brokers that provide certificates, the vendors that provide equipment, the roaming hubs and roaming agents. We needed all the Wi-Fi networks, the identity providers, and eventually some capability at the end user level. And at least from the WBA standpoint, our objective is for our partners to grow their ecosystems and maintain their business relations using the Open Roaming Federation. So in more detail, Open Roaming for us is a technology that includes several components. Just breaking it down into dimensions, we have a dimension around cybersecurity services. This includes all the PKI infrastructure that WBA developed, so we can deliver certificates, policy, and brokerage services. At the same time, it supports eventually dynamic and static interconnection technologies. The second component and the dimension is the cloud federation. So in that sense, it's where we store, WBA is maintaining a global unique database where all the partners are feeding their information and using their unique organization identifiers. And finally, the network automation piece, where we have these roaming consortium codes deployed globally and also leveraging, very importantly, Passpoint technology. So there is an initial release that was made available of the open roaming. So this document is a series of assets that we have. between the standard, the legal framework, the signaling flows. So there are many documents that the members are now leveraging to deploy open roaming. So really, how does it work? I think it's important just to say that we have these integrated roaming clusters. So every single partner have their roles very well defined. Of course, WBA is helping as the ecosystem policy authority, but once you decide to join, our first recommendation is that you really look into the roles that you want to deploy and what type of services you want to give to your customers. And this can be a combination, so you can play multiple roles in the federation or just one and specialize on that. So I think what's important here is really that you look into the use cases you want to enable, the type of connections that you want to do with your partners, and we'll be able to guide you to the best, ecosystem brokers, for instance, if you are just intending to be a network provider or an identity provider. So it's quite flexible. So on this note, where I think we could just spend here a bit more time is the onboarding flow. I think this is where we typically receive more questions. So really, starting on this simple baseline that we have, that is the Open Roaming Cloud Federation with all the components and dimensions that I mentioned, there is of course an onboarding process. So we'll help you with getting the necessary WBA onboarding information, the right documents, the ID, and then once you do that step, that's when you are going to decide who is your ecosystem broker. Of course, if in yourself you are an ecosystem broker, we'll get you set up. So we'll be signing your certificate authority and issuing a certificate authority, and you become an open roaming ecosystem broker. Then for the network and identity provision, we really separate the way we onboard the different players. So in one end, we have the open roaming identity providers. So again, you get provisioned with a certificate, you accept the terms of service. And once you go through this step, you start provisioning your devices with the open roaming policies. It's a one-time process. So any company can decide eventually to have policies, to have information on the end user devices. This is just one example of the companies we have been working with. And once we do this, we go to the other side and we also onboard the network providers eventually through the ecosystem brokers. So the networks get their certificate, they accept the terms of service, and eventually they can broadcast their open roaming policies. And basically, without any interaction between the network and the identity provider, everyone becomes part of the federation. So what happens next is once one device goes and tries to attach to an open roaming network provider, there is a process where we establish a secure tunnel through our public key infrastructure, and the radius information is exchanged for authentication. And all of these may happen in an dynamic way, may happen leveraging existing relations, but it's really something that we don't have anymore to wait for bilateral relations to just scale this ecosystem. And really important then is how we go in terms of interop, certification, continuous integration, continuous development. So WBA here is playing a role helping all the partners to select the policies they want to enable depending on the business cases. So really creating this abstraction layer so the ecosystem can work and move faster. Okay, so, and I think with the technology always comes what we are doing in terms of implementation and roadmap. So right now, the version we have launched in May already includes most of the features in that sense. So if you see release 1 for all the components, provides at least fully functional ways of you to deploy open roaming and leverage the service. So anything that you would like in terms of enabling business cases, provisioning your networks, your devices, that's possible today. You may see some latest deployments, for instance, from Cisco on Canary Wharf, with Oxbotic on the automotive, but many more members. We are, of course, starting to onboard the membership, but I could count more than 35 companies now looking into open roaming and coming to the calls and then joining the group. In fact, I think we have now around 270 individual members on these groups listed, so it's gaining quite some momentum. So what we are going to do next is working with the leadership of the open roaming to define the next release. So this will be an evolving concept. There is many ideas and things that the team want to enable. So things like a more advanced database for location. We want to expand it to more use cases like IoT, even more fine-grained type of quality of service, and then tools for managing profiles. So just to name a few examples. And yeah, so on this note, I hope this gives you at least an umbrella view on what the project teams have been up to. So I think open roaming is a perfect combination for us to finally resolve this issue. It's the result of more than 10 years of work from the members, and specifically 3 years on incubating roaming evolution. So for you to join, yeah, please by any means contact us, but we have created one website. You can just go online and sign up. Eventually, once you do that, you can then adopt the framework and the standards. You will have to choose which interconnect model and technologies you want to use, select your business partners that are already members of Open Roaming. You configure your networks and customer devices, and eventually you are part of the federation, and everything should run quite smoothly. So on this note, I would naturally like to give time to our fellow speakers and real practical examples. So let me just drop up here and invite you really to contact us after the webinar to get involved.
Thank you very much, Bruno, for going over that. There's an awful lot of content there, and appreciate that there's also a lot of questions being asked, which is fantastic. But so let me just pick out a couple of those questions and make sure that we have a chance to cover at least some of them. So the first one, Bruno, is can you talk a little bit more about quality of service and how it's enforced?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So that's a very key point to us. So when I mentioned that we have been working, for the last 10 years on, next generation hotspot enablements at different venues, we were always very concerned with, okay, let's get the user on the network using the standard mechanisms that we have. So for the first time, with this abstraction layer that we have incubated in roaming evolution and some of the innovation that Cisco transferred to the WBA building on top of that, now we have a way to enforce SLAs, so networks must comply with a minimum set of capabilities, and at the same time, through policy, allow the identity providers really to mandate specific network providers to comply with their QoS requirements. So it's more in terms of what QoS the venue can give, if the identity provider is willing to accept it or just move the user to a new venue. So it's something really new that is already being deployed right now.
Yeah, and I think this sort of fits quite nicely to the next question. So how can I get on board and do a trial? That was a question that's just been raised.
Oh, yeah, yes, in fact. So yeah, I would reinforce that, yeah, please take a look on the website, or we gave some direct contacts, but I'm happy to share that starting last week, we just finalized an onboarding specification. So this is an onboarding specification both for identity providers and network providers. Is something that you can, for instance, share with your engineering teams, and really then working with your ecosystem broker, you can really go through a very smooth process. So trials, we are calling for trials right now. The companies that you saw, the logos on the screen, they are forming their partnerships. So it's a very good timing. If you have a venue, if you have a network that you want to trial open roaming, it's a good moment to do that as we come up also with converged test plans. So it's something that is off the shelf. I forgot to mention that open roaming is compatible with previous Wi-Fi generations, so should work over the top in that sense.
Okay, and just one last question before we move on. How are ISPs involved on open roaming implementations?
Yeah, so I imagine mentioning ISP is the broader term of this concept, and in that sense, I would just pick on the uniqueness of WBA membership. So I think even though we have mobile operators, cable operators, Wi-Fi only operators, in one end, they are all ISPs for Wi-Fi, and all of them are enabling different use cases and business cases. So I would say that any ISP is virtually enabled as well to take part in open roaming. But I would be happy to follow up offline and understand if there is a specific flavor in this ISP model that we could also onboard into open roaming. Thank you. Good question, Sarah.
Okay, so there are more questions here, but in the interest of time, we'll move on. I would like to introduce our next speaker. He has a long history in the global telecom space. So Chris Bruce, he's the Managing Director of Global Reach Technology. He's worked extensively with the Wireless Broadband Alliance over the past 10 years. He's been both chair and co-chair and is now a board director of the WBA. So please welcome Chris Bruce.
Hello, thank you, Sarah, and good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, wherever you're joining us from around the world. You've heard from Tiago and Bruno, firstly about the challenges, the problems we're trying to fix with open roaming, and from Tiago, and now you heard from Bruno the mechanics and the methods we're going to use to address those. But what I'd like to talk about is the commercial impetus for open roaming. As Sarah says, I've been a board member of the WBA for 10 years, both my previous company, British Telecom, and now representing Global Reach Technology. I joined Global Reach largely because it has the similar philosophy to the WBA, completely aligned with the mission to connect users seamlessly and securely. And we as Global Reach intend to play a big part in open roaming, both enabling venues and Wi-Fi network operators to participate, and mobile operators and IDPs to connect their users to sites. So I want to tackle the question of the commercial impetus. So there we go. Hopefully you can see my slides okay. Why now? I mean, as has been said, we've been working on roaming for a number of years, doing really fantastic work. But now is a step change. It really is very different. And open roaming, to me, absolutely radically lowers the barriers to entry and adoption of Wi-Fi roaming. So that as Tiago mentioned, the guy with a coffee shop and a router, he's effectively a Wi-Fi network operator offering access to his customers and perhaps others that are passing the shop. Now, for the first time, venues as small as that could participate, and we're going to explain how. It builds on all the existing work that WBA has been doing in terms of the programs, the specifications around the RIC standard that has become the foundation for open roaming, but it also adds in other resources and other security features that now really make a step change. And most importantly, it creates the methods and the business incentives to standardize and automate scale. And I think that really is the key. We've had all the piece parts. We've done some great showcases at Mobile World Congress, very high density, high usage environments, but now we need to scale across lots and lots of different venues. And it extends roaming really to the first time to the enterprise Wi-Fi owner. Up until now, it's kind of been operator to operator mostly, with some offload in some instances, but now it's the enterprise owner, Wi-Fi owner, that can participate with policy control. So they can take control of who connects to their network and on what basis. On the other hand, for the operator, I believe this is a great opportunity to use Wi-Fi for a predictable grade to augment cellular coverage, to reach further indoors into areas that the cellular network finds difficult to reach, to provide that extra capacity in areas where there's so many users on the cellular network. And then if you look right now through the COVID period, I think it's going to create a lot of questions around the economic future we're going to face coming out of this. And I think there'll be a lot of questions about what's the best way to roll out 5G networks, what's the pace we should take, how much should we continue to use 4G, and perhaps smooth that cost curve to use other available networks to manage that transition. I think most importantly, it recognizes the value of identity. Really, really important. There's so many brands, there's so many operators, there's so many social media companies that've got users and customers who'd like to connect securely. And the value of that identity is absolutely paramount to making the open roaming work. It enforces security measures, which is one of the issues that Tiago mentioned. And most importantly, it addresses areas and protects user data privacy. And finally, offers policy control to the operator as much as the Wi-Fi owner. They can decide where to offer access based on the SLA that they've secured with the Wi-Fi owner. So I guess the question is, what's it taken so long? And I think to get to this point, I think it's worth reflecting on the other big roaming environment that exists, and that's cellular roaming. And with this picture here, I hope you can see it clearly. I've got three streams going left to right. So GSM, the GSMA, I think has created a phenomenal marketplace and a fantastic utility for all of us to use cellular phone for voice or data when we're traveling abroad, typically abroad, occasionally domestically. And the proposition or the result has been the creation of a simple, secure, consistent user experience. But when and this has been developing over the last 25, 30 years, I guess. But we have to remember that in the GSM world, there's been initially 2, maybe 3. In the case of the UK, went a bit mad and we ended up with 5 in a country. And now if you look at that across the world, you've got perhaps 750 operators creating standard roaming agreements with their peers. So you've got a kind of a 750 by 750 matrix of agreements. Now you couldn't deploy those if each one was slightly different or technically connected differently. No, it's one way of doing it. I guess the only thing that changes is the rate, the wholesale rate between the operators. Also, it's typically international. There are some exceptions, but typically it's been driven international roaming. Now, if you look at Wi-Fi, and I'm a big fan of Wi-Fi, I've been in this game a long time. But you have to admit, as Tiago said, it can be complex, sometimes insecure, and inconsistent in the user experience across different Wi-Fi networks. So when it comes to roaming, there's actually thousands of Wi-Fi operators in a country, whether they're a telco or a standalone Wi-Fi operator, whether it's a venue, a famous brand, or potentially the guy with the coffee shop. And the WBA has done pretty well in developing standards that enable operators to connect, but they've tended to be bilateral. They've tended to be telco to telco. There are very clear standards, but sometimes it's difficult to enforce. So the big step change for me with open roaming is that we get back to that simple, secure, consistent experience that the GSMA has been so successful with. We address what is now going to be hundreds of thousands of Wi-Fi site owners and operators, because all of those can now participate down to the smallest operator. And if you do that, you will end up creating millions, not 750 by 750, but 7,500, 750,000, 7.5 million, who knows, of potential agreements. And they've got to be standardized, and they've got to be multilateral, domestic and international. So to do that, we have to radically change the time it takes to onboard a network or an operator or an identity provider. Typically now, we're Global Reach, we work with mobile operators or other identity providers, and it can take many months for us to, despite the standards, to make sure that both parties are happy, both the operator and the network, and end up with an agreement and going live, and that could take many months. With open roaming, this radically changes. We've stripped out a lot of the steps there, so that we get straight to once the venue's been enabled, it can then onboard other operators in a matter of hours in a self-sign-up way. So if we look at the use cases, I think there's fundamentally 3. People say, well, I don't get the commercial model for open roaming. Well, I don't think it's that difficult, really. If we look at the traditional public Wi-Fi, if you like, where there's the users are fans, supporters, customers, guests, passengers, loyalty card members, depending on your environment and how you view your end customer. And the authentication method can be through a portal, or through a social media, through a credit card, through an app, or through a loyalty scheme. And these sites can be concert venues, coffee shops, retail, transportation. And the commercial model here, what's in it for the venue, is a radically improved customer experience. Getting connected is a hygiene factor to Wi-Fi in a lot of these places. and really the purpose is it's a utility to help provide an environment where the customer will consume other core products and services. So this is an enhancement to that facility. And in terms of how you monetize it, I think, with things like Release 3 and Hotspot 2 and other methods, you can still message your user in session about messages about T's and C's and other upsell messages, but you can still do this in a GDPR compliant way. And I think there's also an opportunity for looking at anonymized GDPR compliant analytics between the identity provider and the venue. If I look to the second use case, mobile offload, again, not new, but this just radically changes the number of sites and the speed to connect sites for an operator, both indoor and outdoor, covering cellular coverage black spots. Your users could be commuters, workers, citizens, shoppers, city visitors, tourists, and it could be like we've got here an outdoor network in New York with the Link NYC. It could be a shopping mall. It could be inside an office building. And the commercial model here is a volume-related tariff. How much are you offloading or sharing? But in return, there's some expectations about the service levels that can be expected. And then the final use case is what I call corporate premises, what my American colleagues called carpeted enterprise, and other corporate sites. And here the users are not necessarily customers, they're employees, contractors, visitors, guests. And the benefit is seamless connection for the visitor or the staff, freeing up the folks in the front of house from all that Wi-Fi admin, that little yellow post-it note that Tiago was talking about, scribbled down. And is that an L? Is that a capital I? What is that character? It's just friction when really you want a seamless and professional way of greeting people to your premises. But also, if you combine it with the offload, maybe a way to monetize some of that underutilized fiber backhaul that you've got into that site. Many enterprises are using backhaul for Wi-Fi, perhaps 20%, 30% of the capacity. Plenty of unused capacity there. It's an economic waste at a time when cellular networks are bursting with congestion in a lot of urban areas. So the sort of site is a corporate office, it's a visitor center, it could be an operational building, it could be a warehouse. And the commercial model here, I don't expect that you'd sell this to these sort of users, of course, but it's part of a managed service fee that you would take as an enterprise from your service provider. So the ultimate goal is a connected user journey on trains and boats and planes and cities and retail and hospitality and outdoor, and that's the vision we want to get to, so that you've got a predictable sort of service levels in a secure way. So at this note, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so I think the first question that's probably relevant for you would be, how can a hotel Wi-Fi provider join and implement access, and with which credentials a hotel guest can be identified and connected seamlessly?
Okay, so a hotel, that's an interesting one. Obviously, a lot of usage of Wi-Fi in hotels. And I think the opportunity here is for the hotel brand or actually the owner of the property, depending on the situation, to take control of their Wi-Fi environment and to manage who gets access to the Wi-Fi and how. It could be through their own loyalty scheme, getting seamless access, and obviously they can control the policy there, but they might have an arrangement with a mobile operator for offload, or they might have an arrangement with a credit card or some other brand that or social media brand that they might negotiate access on a commercial basis. Now, this could be at a brand level across the whole of an estate, or it could be an individual site or property. That's probably depends on the situation. How is by participating in this ecosystem that Bruno's described. We at Global Reach, and there are others, we specialize in enabling venue partners to be hotspot 2 ready, to be able to provide the facilities that it takes to contribute into this ecosystem, and we and others would help with them in managing that through the process. What Bruno was alluding to is that there are, in inverted commas, brokers who can ensure that all of the enterprise customers don't have to participate in all the WBA things. That can be done on your behalf.
Great. So I think we're at the end of the questions that specifically for you, Chris. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on in the interest of time, as we're a little bit over. Thank you very much, Chris. And now we're going to talk to our next speaker. I'd like to introduce Derek Peterson. He's the CTO of Boingo Wireless. He is responsible for the company's technical vision and strategy, and he has a very deep understanding of telecoms, sitting on the board of many industry bodies, including co-chairing of the WBA. So I'd like to make a warm welcome to Derek.
All right, hello everyone. Good morning and good evening and all of that. I got photobombed earlier, if you saw, so my kids were off screen photobombing, trying to make me smile. So that's probably what you saw going on there a little bit, but it's always fun to be working from home. You know, one of the things about working from home and all of these connections that we're talking about is the connections are essential. And what we've been working in the WBA is to really just improve our ability to get people connected. And I think that this open roaming that you've heard Tiago and Bruno and Chris talk about, and you're going to hear from Matt after me, is really a step change and a step forward in what we're trying to do, which is really just bridge the gap and allow us to have connectivity anywhere and whenever we want it, in a defined way that provides good quality, but most importantly, as Tiago said, it needs to be secure and it needs to be seamless, because it is essential that we all have it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we bridge the gap, because one of the things that they did so well when they talked is they explained what open roaming was, and I'm going to do a little bit of that, but I'm also going to just always push that envelope a little bit forward to say, okay, how do we get to that next step? So we can always know where we're at, which we've got now, and we are on a great journey, but also look forward about where we're going. All right, so first, I would be remiss if I didn't first talk about Boingo. I've been at Boingo now for a long time, 9 years. Been a good journey for me. You know, from my history, I started off after I got out of the military trying to figure out how to make roaming work. I worked at Anderson Consulting trying to solve how towers talk to each other and you can transfer a call from tower to tower. I went from that and I went and said, okay, how do I transfer calls from satellites to cellular when I worked for a while doing that. And then it was always about, okay, how do I improve this roaming experience through the BSS, OSS systems? And then I came to Wi-Fi, and that's been my goal. How do we get Wi-Fi to be able to roam and interconnections happen seamlessly like they do on cellular, like they have done on satellite, and what are we going to do to make that happen? And open roaming is that big push towards that, because in the end, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get people connected, and that's really the vision of Boingo. We connect over 1 billion consumers annually across all of our different footprint, whether it's military bases, airports, which a lot of people know us for, apartment complexes, and mini stadiums and other locations, offices and such throughout the world. The key thing on when we're thinking about how to succeed in Boingo is we're thinking about how to use all the networks together. So we want to leverage all the spectrum that's available to build the best connection. And it's not just about connecting people, it's also about connecting things and connecting people to their things. So this personal networks that we talked about on Wednesday with Pi and some of the other networks that we're trying to create with IoT or Internet of Me or IOME, it's really about trying to solve that connectivity challenge for everybody and managing all those multiple technologies that are happening in the same venue with all the different identity providers, all the different connections that need to happen. And then really just focusing on how do you make it happen in a way that's interconnected instead of coexisting, which is our approach today. So if we look back at roaming, and let's just look back real quick at roaming with Wi-Fi. So Tiago did a good job showing, where we've come from, all the different permutations that we've done to make this happen. But one of the key things that really we pushed forward back in 2015 was focusing in on doing this MNOs, getting network providers, carriers to roam onto Wi-Fi networks. And that was something that Boingo, starting in 2001 as an aggregate provider, like many that are, a lot of them are gone now, but that was our original design, is how do we get people connected to Wi-Fi and make it work really well. And this was the step change. It was a real big opportunity for the industry to say, okay, we've been working on getting people connected. We now have a secure way of doing it. And it was a very simple way. It was eSIM. So it was using your cell phone credentials to be able to get connected to known quality hotspots. And the challenge has always been, once we have this consistent user experience, we were taking advantage of the cellular technology there and authentication, and we know what kind of service experience is required, and we could deliver that. Then we could create this end-to-end network integration, and we could end up pushing forward this provisioning that we did back in 2015. And that one of the key elements of being able to get more people onto that network over time has been maintaining that network quality, and then also the network manageability and the data exchange that you have to have. So RICs and all of those things that we've done inside the WBA, but just as important, all of the other things that you need to do to make sure that the data is there so that you can make sure you're delivering that experience and you know what kind of experience you're delivering. And accounting has been, one of these off again, on again things with Wi-Fi that we continually improve upon in how we're doing the accounting. And so that's been really what we've done, is we've developed this new category back in 2015 that we called carrier grade Wi-Fi. And we were using that primarily for all of our pass point or direct connections. And then we were still stuck with all those other ways that Tiago talked about in connecting, walled gardens and retail offerings and all of these other ways that we had to get connected with little sticky notes with passwords on it. And this way that we were doing it with this credential type was really just focused on that first thing, the SIM, and then we ended up partnering with some others with certificates and other mechanisms, but we never got real good movement, because the thing that was missing was, how do we end up getting a 5G service with security and I shouldn't say security, with quality that everybody wanted, because if I'm going to have to only be able to get carriers on, I always have to have carrier grade Wi-Fi, and it's sometimes not economical or not reasonable to have carrier grade Wi-Fi at every venue. And so therefore, when we had some of our venues that we wanted to put carriers on, we weren't able to do so because they weren't susceptible for creating this carrier grade Wi-Fi. And so things started evolving in the 5G era. It was recognized that we could connect a lot of different people. We could create more and more carrier grade Wi-Fi locations. So today we have over 150,000 pass point locations that are carrier grade, that allow carriers to connect to this carrier grade Wi-Fi with this SLA and all of this. We have 3+ carrier and cable provider relationships. I always like that. Marketing limits me there on what I can say. And then of course we've got a mass device and platform support that's happening now for this carrier grade Wi-Fi. And if you've heard me talk before, I was like, okay, we've got carrier grade Wi-Fi solved. We need to go solve the next thing. What's the next thing? We've got to get into enterprise. We got to get into some of these retail locations. We've got to try to focus in on how we're going to end up pushing this outside to all of these other locations. And so the other thing that's been going on at the same time is there's been this convergence happening, right? So there's this convergence of Wi-Fi and cellular, and us recognizing that they can work together, that they can interconnect, and that you can end up having a great connection future by combining Wi-Fi and cellular and allowing people to use that. And we can do things, and we did this with some of the carriers, where you make decisions and routing decisions based on the quality of one network or the other, and you steer individuals to the best quality. There's a lot of companies out there who've come up with solutions to be able to allow you to stay on both and stay connected and have better experiences, and or automatic selection moving back and forth between these. Again, really good improvement. But the importance here that I'm trying to bring up is this seamless and secure experience with open roaming is really us allowing us to show this convergence in action, because we're allowing ourselves to say not just carrier grade Wi-Fi, but all Wi-Fi can now be a part of this ecosystem. And as we develop tighter integrations across the ecosystem with some of these enhanced services that we put behind after you establish the connection, so you define those policies as Bruno talked about, and you have a policy that says, oh, I'm in a lower class, but I don't need all the SLAs, but I still want accounting records. And then you partner with one of the ecosystem players who's good at accounting records, and you can still get those accounting records. And so we can end up allowing more players to come in and be a part of that integration, instead of just that one individual having to do everything by themselves, as Bruno kind of shared, and I think also Chris shared. You know, we used to have to do one by one each integration. Okay, let me pass back a form to figure out how we're going to connect. Okay, what are our marketing requirements? Okay, now what are my SLAs? What reports am I going to get? Now you can say, okay, join the ecosystem, add an additional ecosystem partner that's going to provide some of that data that maybe I as a network provider don't have. And then all of a sudden we can end up creating a real ecosystem of players to work together to deliver perhaps close to carrier grade Wi-Fi, but then other aspects that are part of carrier grade Wi-Fi that you may want to be able to move down the line of having carrier grade to some of these lower grade Wi-Fi connections. And so what that does though is that opens the door. We now have access to more footprint, and that footprint has policies associated with it, and identity providers decide which policies that they're going to end up connecting to, what requirements that they have for being able to connect to them, and you end up creating this huge mass of roaming opportunities across multiple different identities, multiple different types of networks, and it ends up really expanding opportunities for the entire ecosystem to be able to get connected. And we've talked about some of those, you know, enterprise, retail, transportation, all of them have a role to play. And again, one of the key things here is measures that we're going to be providing is when we define our policies and we say, okay, I'm a network provider, as Bruno said, and there's an identity provider, and this identity provider says, I will connect to a network that has this tier 1 definition, has availability, speed, low latency, but I don't need AP to AP handoff for mobility. So if I'm not planning on them making Wi-Fi calling, so if they, you know, are going from AP to AP and I happen to drop a connection, that's okay, because I'm a network provider that's providing some kind of video service, perhaps, or sorry, identity provider who's focused in on that as well. And I don't need reporting because I'm just, you know, doing this best case. Now I can end up as a video provider using my credentials from my video service, allowing people to connect to networks so that they can do video and not having to pay a carrier grade Wi-Fi service, because I don't need it. I only need a tier 1 service. I don't need reporting, and I don't need handoff because I'm most likely going to buffer my video as if I'm doing any kind of mobility. So these are the different kind of classes that we have. And then as you look at those classes, again, different providers might provide some of that reporting and be a part of that ecosystem that is established and managed throughout that. And so these quality standards that we're building that have been influenced by Boingo and Cisco and others in the WBA are really going to help us define this open roaming framework, which adds this classification and measure to really bring about more growth, which is the key thing. We want that growth. We want to allow us to roam because connection is essential. We all want connection wherever we go. And maybe we're willing to, and maybe we're willing to make that adjustment to an SLA to be able to get that. And the next thing is we also, a key component to make this happen is we need to realize that a lot of this is going to require software, right? So software is a key component of network anymore. It's no longer just network equipment. It's a lot of the software that behind it that really makes things work. And so we need to focus in on how we can deliver more and more of this as software functions that run on equipment across the ecosystem. And that might run in the cloud, which is what we're doing with the Cloud Federation, but also just as important is how does that scale down and provide more reliability and control and speed at the edge? And how do we end up getting the edge to be a part of that? And that's something that we're going to be covering as well. And we need to figure out as we develop these standards in the WBA. See if I can get the right slide. So this is my last slide. So the key thing is that, you know, I always have this call to action. Last year, my call to action, we need to get enterprises in. Every CIO, and if you saw, I came out on I pushed to get into some network CIO magazines, and I said, every CIO needs to be deploying this pass point connectivity. What we've done now is we've made every CIO have an easier way to do that. They can do that through open roaming. It makes it easier for them. They don't have to sit there and try to solve the connectivity problem from point to point because WBA has solved that for them. They don't have to worry about some of the configuration and the deployment characteristics because Matt over at Cisco has solved that for some of his guys. He's got a easy click button he's developing for you. So at the end, we're going to end up having this great network. And really, the only thing that's missing for this great network is all of you. So we need to get you guys all involved. Please join the Open Roaming Federation. Help us figure out how to really push the needle and create this automatic and secure Wi-Fi to move beyond just carrier grade Wi-Fi and move across the entire ecosystem, and then figure out how to join it so it co-integrates with all the great work we're doing also on the 5G side. So with that, I think I'm open for connections or questions, I should say. Can't hear you, Sarah.
Always helps to take your sound off mute. Thank you.
Yeah.
You talked about the importance of convergence. Where do you think the quick wins are, and where are the biggest benefits?
You know, I think the quick win is really just getting everybody involved and then defining some of these quality metrics that we're doing. We've been talking about quality for a while, and one of the things that we've started to work on is this mapping between the QCI levels of cellular and what are the QCI levels of Wi-Fi. And I think that's going to be a big part of what we're going to be defining. So I think that that is a quick opportunity for all of us, is to just say, hey, come in, join as a tier 1. We'll get you up to tier 2, tier 3, where some of the models change in the retail landscape and the monetization landscape. But there's a path, and that's what's real important right now, is there's a path for every network to join the federation right now. And so the quick win is go join the WBA, get involved, worry about the quality, the carrier grade, and all of those things that we've been working on, you know, in Boingo for a long time to try to get things moving. But you don't need all of that now to participate. So join now, get involved, and we'll get you there. You know, those other levels that you need to get to, there's going to be ecosystem partners starting to get involved, and you'll have those easy buttons like what Matt's creating that will end up coming across in all of the different aspects that in the past you used to have to build yourself.
Yeah, great. So we have got a few more questions. Some are directed at some of the other speakers as well. So let me just ask you this one. In a tri-party venue like an airport, there would be some free data and then post that paid data, and this revenue shared with location operators and roaming partners, etc. normally. How does that work going forward? Is it the same? Is it different? Is that something you can answer today?
You know, I think a lot of it's going to be same, but I think that there's an opportunity for some differences as well. So the key thing is you got to look at each use case, you got to look at each identity provider and what they're trying to do, and then what they're willing to sacrifice for accomplishing their key goals. And so, you know, when we're working in an airport today, and I know we're known for that, and it's a very important part of what our history. You know, we have multiple people, businesses that we're trying to support in that airport. It's not just the commercial person who comes into the airport, it's the operations that are going on, it's the Starbucks, it's the McDonald's, it's the bookstores. They all need that connectivity for their point of sale devices, for all of their other things. And depending on what you're connecting, there's different requirements. And I think that that's the key thing that is sometimes hard when we're treating networks as, you know, this underlying connectivity, is we sometimes lose sight about what we're connecting. And so we end up raising the bar so high because we focus on voice calls. Well, maybe that's not needed for some of this connections. And so we need to narrow that down and scope that down appropriately so we can deliver the appropriate service. And that has been the challenge, I think, in our industry is, you know, connections lose sight of what they're connecting a lot of times, and trying to bring that back in when you're designing a network is a key component. And then what's nice about open roaming is we've kind of created a model that allows us to have that scale up and down. You can end up choosing different providers or different identity providers, different policies, and depending on what you choose, that's defining your SLA. And so you can end up allowing yourselves to basically steer when you're building your network. So this is where deployment comes in very important, like what Tiago said. You can end up building different VLANs or segments inside your network for different users who are willing to pay different parts. And now you can end up creating a better solution. A good example of this is what we're doing in the military today. So in the military today, they're quarantining barracks as military service members when they come back in their barracks for 2 weeks as they transfer, you know, because of the pandemic. What the military wanted is they wanted a network for those guys and gals who were coming back to be able to still do their work, but they didn't want them watching videos and doing all the other things. They didn't want to pay for that. And so what we did is we created using that same network, we created an SSID, and we had to go through all these levels of setting up a different network. And then, okay, should we make it passpoint ready and all of this stuff so that we could create this segment for education inside the military for the quarantine. And then we have that same network doing this other thing. With open roaming, it could be a credential. We could say that policy, that credential goes to that, same SSID, that policy, that credential goes to that. And all of a sudden we end up creating this quality of service that we want to deliver without having to go through as many iterations. And it simplifies the delivery of it.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you very much. And thank you to all the speakers that have spoken up until now. We are about to move into our panel session, and I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce Matt McPherson. Matt is the wireless CTO at Cisco. He has worldwide responsibility for Cisco's wireless thought leadership, which manages the innovation pipeline from idea to proof of concept to execution decisions. And Matt is involved with multiple industry bodies and standards groups, and is also board director of the Wireless Broadband Alliance. So Matt, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you and let you crack on with your panel.
Thank you, Sarah. And it's I have to say it's been just fantastic. I've been watching the panels on the side, and I've been looking at all the questions coming in and all the interest. It's always great to see, especially the question, how do I do a trial over and over and over again? And we're of course very eager to get more and more of these access networks onto these trials as we go forward. And of course, that's one of the key things that we plan on doing over at the WBA. You know, I have to really say, the world of wireless is on fire. It's on fire. I mean, I'm looking at shared spectrum. I'm looking at licensed spectrum. We're looking at what's going on with locally licensed spectrum and what's going on around the world. We got Chairman Pai just opened up 1,200 megahertz. Yeah, 1,200 megahertz. I'm thinking about the startup of what's been going on with Wi-Fi, and I look at what we have now in 1,200 megahertz, and I just kind of, you know, as a radio head, I kind of go, you know, what is this going to do to the economy? You know, what is this? What new business models are going to be coming for this? And then we have Wi-Fi 6, right? We have 5G. We have traditional roaming, and now we have this new thing, open roaming. And so we start looking across this. If it starts becoming more relevant than we've ever seen it before, you know, we're all using wireless. We all want wireless. We all live wireless. I'd be willing to bet that there's not a single person listening to this session right now that's not connected to wireless in some way or another. Whether they're connected to wireless to actually be on this panel, whether one of the participants in listening to the panel, whether they got up. It's kind of funny. I can't get up in the morning. I swear my wife's next to me. You know, we're not even out of bed yet. What is she doing? She's checking all of her messages. The world of wireless is just connecting us in everything that we do. And you know, as we see all these things going on, we start to think, boy, what do we do? We have all these different activities and these motions and this activity coming out of 3GPP and this activity that's coming out of WFA and WBA. How does this converge, right? How do these things come together? So I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking out there. You're thinking, I've been sitting here, I've been listening to speakers for an hour and a half. It's time for me to go get a sandwich. You know, I need to go get a cup of coffee. And I'm telling you what, you go get a cup of coffee now, you're going to miss it, because we're going to talk about some of these issues and how some of this all comes together. So we got just this fantastic panel today, and we pulled this panel from all different walks, right? We've got neutral players, we got equipment players, we got service providers, we got cloud providers. So if you want to hear the different perspectives on convergence, you better stay glued to your seat, because we're going to get into some of these questions, and look, we'll be watching the panel. Sarah will be watching the panel. If go ahead and ask those tough questions, because for one of the first times in a while, I actually get to ask the questions, and the people on the panel have to do all the hard work. So I'm looking for some really tough questions coming in off the panel, and we'll feed these out to these experts that we have sitting here. So why don't we go ahead and get started, and we'll do a quick round of introductions. And Derek, you're on my screen first. I don't know if they're all in the same order, but why don't we start with you?
So I think you guys, hopefully you just heard from me. So I'm Derek Peterson, I'm the CTO from Boingo Wireless. Thanks, Matt, for having me on the panel, and looking forward to those tough questions.
I have Todd next.
Hey, good afternoon from Atlanta. Todd Zeiler with AT&T, and I've started in the business in '92, and currently in the global roaming business under JR. I own intercarrier architecture, implementation operations in the intercarrier architecture roaming world. And prior to this, I owned the CTO ran architecture under Gordon Mansfield Nagal, where for 4 years we worked on the rollout of 5G.
I have Greg next.
Hey, I'm Greg Dharai. I'm the Vice President of Product Management for Cisco's Enterprise Wireless Portfolio, and I'm here coming to you from Palo Alto.
And Swally?
Wale Nunes, coming in from New York City, so I lead up developer relations from a B2B perspective here at Samsung.
And then Raj.
Hi, everybody. I'm Raj Gajwani at Google. I am a director in Google's Area 120 Incubator, where we work on a variety of next generation and current wireless technologies. And happy Juneteenth, everybody.
So it's great to have all the panelists here today, and like I said, it's great to have the breadth of expertise available to us. So let's dive in and take advantage of some of this. So Derek, I'm gonna start with you. I know you were just presenting, but I can't help but go to you first. There was a question on convergence right there at the end, and here we are going into the convergence panel. And I know you've been thinking convergence, boy, probably as long as anybody I can remember. In fact, years ago, I remember reading your convergence manifesto, right, which was telling us, I think, frankly, about where we are now, that you were predicting what was going to happen in the industry, and I think we're starting to see that. So how would you define convergence? What's the scope of these different things that are going on in the industry, and where are we today in the market?
Yeah, I mean, I shared it a little bit on I think it was Monday in our WBA meetings, and you know, when I was really just trying to push the envelope of where we're at and where we need to go. You know, one of the things I remember is when LAA started coming about, there was this idea that LAA was going to come in and we're going to have all these issues because we got Wi-Fi and LAA in the same spectrum. And then what's interesting is we're now have CBRS, and we're saying, okay, let all these, let's share this spectrum. And we're trying that as, okay, how do we do that? Let's create this thing called the SAS and let's try to figure out that. So there's been an evolutionary path of, okay, how do you go from, hey, no way am I going to share? And it even happened on the business side. You know, there's a long time, all the carriers said, I'm not going to touch Wi-Fi. Stay away from that thing. It's sitting over there doing its little thing. Let's just leave it alone. But we've come a long way in recognizing that that idea that first, don't use it, then how do you coexist and together inside the same spectrum or inside that is moving now. And really what we need to focus in on is this co-integration. You know, that's where convergence is going, and that's where we need it to go, is how does it integrate together? And Todd can talk a little bit about what they did over there at AT&T, but hopefully, you know, we see it in the handsets. You know, the guys like Apple and Google and the handsets are building this integration in the handsets, and we're starting to see it building it in the networks. But there's still a lot of work to do there, I think, to really just get us to that next level of co-integration. And so, to me, it's been an evolutionary path. I've been happy to be a part of it, and I'm excited that what we're going to be doing next, now that we've got new standards coming out where for the first time the 3GPP is even thinking about unlicensed and how it integrates, right? And the WBA is involved in that heavily because we're kind of the founders and pushing this unlicensed forward. And so I think that's great, and I think that's where we're headed, is away from coexistence and into co-integration, and that's exciting times. It's going to allow us to have a Wi-Fi access point know when there's a LTE network point in the same frequency, and they'll be able to work around each other or work with each other to provide a better experience.
Thanks, Derek. And I think, you know, it's interesting that you're bringing up AT&T. You know, Todd, AT&T's been doing wireless as long as I can remember. In fact, I almost hate to say, you know, how young and how much less gray I had when AT&T started doing wireless. I mean, clearly you've been an industry leader. Yeah. I would have liked to have seen some of those pictures.
Yeah, my daughters enjoy joking about those too.
So you've been doing this from the 3GPP side, and obviously a major leader in the industry. Where do you see convergence today?
Derek brought up two good examples. When I was at my job before working for JR in the intercarrier architecture world, you know, I owned the LAA CBRS rollout, which, you know, we've publicly, you know, acknowledged that we were very aggressive with. And it's two positive examples. Everybody was very nervous. You know, how are you going to put LAA on the streets? It worked very well. Shows great collaboration between groups like this. CBRS, right? We're up and running. We've been very public with that, and hope to add more use cases in the future with partners that are on this call. But when I was in CTO, I used to use an analogy when I go around telling the convergence story that I'm going to borrow from Mickey Mouse, right? So whether you're coming into the Magic Kingdom by satellite, by fiber, by cellular, by Wi-Fi, right? We want to give the customer the same experience. In full disclosure, are we there yet? Probably not. But, you know, AT&T has been very public. We have two key initiatives, right? Extend that broadband deeper into the edge of our network by fiber, and then also by wireless, right? And whether wireless is licensed, unlicensed, or shared, it's one big fiber network with a wireless extension. You know, I used to go around telling the story quite a bit, and I'd say, look, whether you're extending the fiber by wireless by miles or by a few hundred feet, whether you're extending it with licensed or unlicensed, you know, that's how I think about convergence. But you have to start with the customer in mind. What are they willing to pay for? What are they going to be using it for? Is there device adoption? And what matters to the customer, right? Reliability, seamless, effortless, secure, lag-free. We love to use the word latency. Most people, you know, you go to Thanksgiving and use the word latency, most people are going to fall back asleep. They don't know what you're talking about. But responsiveness, smoothness, right? Speed, and then coverage is starting to be assumed, right? You're going to have me covered. I'll end with a funny story. So I go canoeing this past weekend on a retreat with my sweet 10-year-old daughter. We're out in the middle of nowhere, southeastern United States. And one thing we treasure about these trips is we're unwinding and nobody's connected, right? It's actually a time where you don't want to be connected, and it's fun to see these young people actually disconnect. But we're in the middle of the river and sitting in the canoe. It's quiet. I can see her wheels churning. She turns to me and she says, Dad, not that I'd be tempted to use it, but do you think when we get to our next sandbar camping spot, it'll have Wi-Fi? So as many times as I've tried to explain the difference between cellular and Wi-Fi, and I'm sure you all have tried to do the same, in her mind, her dad's already figured out convergence. She just wants it to connect and she wants it to work. So that's how I tell the convergence story.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I have a similar experience. You know, I travel a lot, or at least I used to travel a lot until the recent months. But I was sitting on a plane, and this mother and her son came on, and the son must have been, I mean, he couldn't have been more than 3, you know, or 4. And he comes on the plane. He's got this some device in his hand, and he says, "Mom, do they have Wi-Fi on the plane?" You know, it's amazing. They're just growing up with it, you know, something that we've spent a lot of time, effort, and hours to make sure that those things are available, and they just expect it. And you know what? The next generation should expect it, shouldn't they?
Red water and connectivity.
If I can just jump in on that, I think it's a historical artifact that we're talking about. Do I have LTE? Do I have Wi-Fi? I don't ask, you know, at my desk, am I on Token Ring or ATM or Frame Relay or an Ethernet packet? And I think that we've pushed the technical details to consumers. My 8-year-old shouldn't need, I hope they want to, but they shouldn't need to tell me whether they're on 5 gigahertz or 2.4 or Wi-Fi or LTE.
That's right.
Moving to a world where that's an anachronism.
Yeah, and that's the truth, right? I mean, do we really need those connection managers? Do we really need the, you know, the disruptive nature of some of the portals and some of those things? So, Greg, I'm gonna go over to you, and you know, this question, maybe this is even a little more contentious, but I think it's a question that's on the top of everybody's mind. Is convergence really necessary? Is it important? Is it important that these technologies come together? I mean, there'd be some out there that would say, you know what? We can solve everything with one stack, right? Shouldn't we just all, you know, get together and just do everything on one stack? But, you know, why is convergence important to the enterprise, to SP, to the end user? Why do we have to do convergence?
Yeah, I think you know, you start with where Todd and Raj started, right? For the end consumer, the person who's using it, it is absolutely important, right? Because otherwise you irritate him or her with a broken experience, right? There's several examples that are given. It's like, you know, and even today, I'm here in my home every day at 11 o'clock. I go for a walk with my son. And when I step out, my WebEx call drops because it's Wi-Fi to cellular handover. Every day it happens, and it's irritating, right? Why should I really bother to turn and do this? Why can't they work together? So it's clearly important from an end consumer perspective. For an enterprise, I think it is becoming increasingly important, and COVID's kind of with the new normals kind of going to force that, right? Like whether, because a lot of people begin their experience from somewhere other than the carefully designed campus network. That could be home, could be the parking lot, could be the road, could be the hotel. And I think if you're not able to provide a seamless experience throughout that journey, and I know that certain networks the enterprise doesn't control, but if they don't play ball with someone like WBA that's trying to create that, they're going to have a very poor experience for their employees, right? Like, and also from a security perspective, you're not really sure that you want to recommend your employees to connect to free Wi-Fi in the airport for what we started this day, the opening keynote speech here, right? And so that's important for enterprises. For service providers, hey, with applications and bandwidth going through the roof, why wouldn't you want to offload? So I think from every angle, for every stakeholder, I think convergence is important. The trick, Matt, and I'm sure you're going to get to it, is it's behind the scenes. Many people need to work together to make it happen. And that's complex. And that's why we have failed. I know Derek has been trying this, and they probably had more success than anyone else. And Global Reach has been trying this as well. But how do enterprises, service providers, venues all work together? That's been the struggle. And I think open roaming kind of addresses that struggle nicely. That's my opinion.
Thanks, Greg. And I couldn't agree more, because it's kind of the responsibility of the different groups that are represented here on the call to connect the dots, and in some cases to reduce the complexity of this solution so that the user doesn't see it, experience it, or have to deal with it. Right? It's oftentimes, I mean, how many times do we get on the technology even to do something like this, and we spend the first 15 minutes just to trying to get everybody connected into the collaboration experience, right? So it's something that can definitely be more seamless. Swally, from a device manufacturer standpoint, look, this drives up the cost of the device, right? I mean, you got Wi-Fi in there, and you've got LTE and now 5G going in there, and you have these other radio technologies that are going in there. Why, from your perspective, is this convergence so important across these stacks?
Well, personally, I think it is because it helps us kind of satisfy the high expectations of our end user, right? And it allows us to deliver what they need, when they need it, and whenever they need it. So you think about our human life, it's dynamic, right? It's based on movement and mobility. And technology has to be able to complement that, right? Whether from an individual perspective or from an enterprise perspective. And I particularly play in the B2B space, right? So because I understand the importance of it, and I know the impact it could have from a society standpoint, and in particular, for example, the first responders, right? So if I think of their journey, there's a journey that happens from the station to the vehicle to out in the field, right? And in that transitional flow, there shouldn't be any compromise in service, right? There should be no compromise in the network, no compromise in the experience, and no compromise in the reliability. And that's why, from our perspective, we do as much as we can to partner with the relevant ISPs or partners who are willing to kind of help us deliver products and solutions that enhance that experience and provide the support that these first responders need to do their job most effectively, right? And one way of doing that is with Samsung DeX. And DeX is bringing the desktop experience powered by the mobile device. So it's powerful and it's efficient, and it can provide an in-vehicle computer, right? So it gives you the flexibility and the productivity that you would get from the typical Samsung environment, from a Samsung device in any environment. And it comes at a low cost. So that's one of the things you brought up, Matt. So it comes at a low cost. So by making the device and the network, this exchange so intelligent, it allows for adequate connectivity at all times. It enables multitasking functionality, and it supports a lot of these data-hungry applications, right? And the network to support everything is there whenever the user needs it.
Yeah, I really love the example of DeX, and I have to admit I've used it quite a bit myself. One of the things that we've realized in tracking internet usage through Cisco VNI is that people are mobile over 72% of the time now. And what that means is they're not just sitting behind their desk anymore. And so this concept of taking a Galaxy device and being able to drive a large monitor, the ability to connect a keyboard, the ability to connect a mouse, and to use a compute platform wherever you are, even if you're connecting to a TV out in a hotel someplace, is extremely powerful. But it occurs to me, when you're doing something like that, where's your dependency for a good experience? Of course, the device has to be integrated well, but it's also very dependent on the network itself, the services going into the cloud, and in order for that experience to be short delay and productive, that network really has to pull us together, and that's where we're seeing some of this, I think, convergence take place. So Raj, I mean, here, you're a cloud provider, you build a phone, you do a network. So from your perspective, how do you see this convergence? Is this a good thing, a bad thing? Is it a complexity? Where's your head on this?
So I think that it's like a moral imperative to improve the living standards of every person in the world. I think that if you look at the broad sweep of history, we've become richer and healthier and better off, and we have more things available because our economy has moved towards shared infrastructure, right? I don't have a separate supply chain for my toothpaste from my TV, right? We have shared infrastructure that makes that all work. And through historical accident, the way computer applications have developed, I used to have one line that was voice, and then I had different things that were for data and different things for video. But I mean, for my kids, TikTok is a thing that can run on any infrastructure. And I think the future is that shared infrastructure unlocks massive innovation and massive value for the consumer and for the service providers. The analogy in my head actually is retail, right? Like Amazon and eBay and Walmart are no longer product companies. They're not a store. They're a platform to any product in the world. And they do very well selling their own stuff, but other people's stuff. And in the back of that, all the rail cars have the same gauge wheels so that the rail cars work together. All of the shipping containers are exactly 40 feet and they're interchangeable. And this, complex supply chain gets bigger and bigger and bigger because you can serve all of the different needs through shared infrastructure. And I think that's where we're going with service providers, right? Today, I'm an AT&T customer, and AT&T mostly sells me their network, which is an excellent network. And tomorrow, I think AT&T will guarantee me connectivity and access to any network that I want, whether it is AT&T's proprietary network or their LTE or their Wi-Fi or their 5G, or in some cases somebody else's network. And that future where all the trains are on the same gauge, all the shipping containers are 40 feet, and one portal, one service provider can get me any network, that I think is a key to unlocking massive innovation and massive productivity and massive wealth for the entire world.
Thanks, Raj. So let's talk a little bit about what it means to implement it. It's come up a couple of times that perhaps doing this type of convergence and making these systems come together, perhaps that actually adds some complexity. So how do we effectively implement convergence? So Todd, we have the service providers implementing this from one side, and I think Todd, the enterprise is also working on this, maybe coming at it from a different angle. And then as we see the enterprise and the service providers starting to come together, I mean, you've got both entities building access networks, right? So how do we effectively implement convergence?
3 jobs ago, before CTO, I ran the Georgia market. And it was before a lot of our C-levels had moved to Dallas, so I had a lot of help, right? I call them executive drive testers. And it's probably one of the most stressful but rewarding jobs I've ever had. And moved into CTO, so I took some of that quote-unquote practical field experience into CTO with me. And I remember sitting there one day, and I owned the RAN piece, but I got a little frustrated with my team. And we were ready to go. We had the hardware and software ready, right? We were ready to go with our RAN vendors. And I said, well, is the transport ready, right? We're about to leap in speeds, right? My device peers were ready, had the hardware, software ready. And I said, well, have we checked with our transport architecture peers, right? Are we ready to upspeed the transport network? And there was crickets in the room. And I don't get frustrated very often. I'm a pretty calm person. But that didn't go over very well with me. And I challenged my team. I said, look, there are 6 key pillars of building this house. And it became kind of famous, and they kind of picked on me, but it became the 6-way match. And so I would challenge them. It starts with the customer, right? Starts with the device. And as I go around and tell this story, I have a picture of a dolphin, right? That's the smartphone device, right? And as that smartphone, which you guys just talked about, there's people on here that are just experts in that space, right? As that's becoming a more complex space. But then I had a picture of a mosquito, right? That's that IoT just buzzing at the net, right? And more of those, and the millions and billions per square foot, so to speak, right? That are just coming and attaching to our network. Right. Then you have the sloth, the fixed wireless device, right? Then you have the fast-moving IoT cheetah, right, for the Vita X world. But it starts with the device, right? And then you move on to number 2, right, the access hardware. And I purposely don't say the cell site hardware or the cellular hardware, right? Because you have sub-6 hardware that is thankfully this go-round can run LTE and 5G. Right. Then you, over time, right, we're getting creative where you're going to start seeing some of the blended, unlicensed, shared, licensed hardware starting to come together, right? You're going to begin to see the Wi-Fi 6, Wi-Fi 6E, and you begin to see some hardware convergence at what we call 4 quadrants, right? You have the tall towers, you have the low rooftops, you have street furniture, and you have indoor. And then that compute is going to begin to centralize. And that's really, really important because we can begin to take advantage of some of that centralized compute as we run those controllers out of the same place. So that's number 2. Number 3 is the software, right? As we centralize that compute for the access, right, now we can begin to bring together slicing, segmentation, QoS. Derek talked about QCI correlation, right? Moken, right? Think of what that begins to do. So that's number 3. Number 4 is transport. You cannot do this without an excellent fiber network, right? You can choke it all day long if you don't bring that together at the same time, right? And then core, right? Core is beginning, the next generation core is access agnostic. It's going to bring slicing to the table. That user plane is going to go closer to the customer. It's going to drive that latency out. It's going to create a more responsive network, right? And then number 6, content. We obviously own some content, but there's times we lease the content. And if you don't get all 6 of those pillars dancing together, that house crumbles. So that's been the way we have built that. And you can see where that works for convergence. By the way, as soon as I landed in the roaming world, I sat with my inter-carrier architecture director. I said, hey, let's put this 6-way match to the test with inter-carrier architecture, and it works. Right? There's some challenges with 6-way match across the globe with latency, right? With local breakout and some other things. So it works. So that's how I think about it.
Thanks, Todd. And I can't help but, I hear what you're saying and I hear what you're talking about, and I see it coming from that service provider perspective, and I see how that's extending out into broader and broader use cases. So, Greg, I'm going to pop back over to you. It's interesting to hear Todd's perspective coming from a service provider, starting from the device, going into the access network, inserting that policy layer and that software layer, going up through the core, and then going out into that cloud service. Ring any bells on the enterprise side of the house?
Yes, I mean, you do start, even if it's enterprise side of the house, you do start with the customer, right? Like, so that pillar is constant. And I do resonate with the 6 pillars Todd spoke about. It may come in with a slightly different order, right? Like if I'm an enterprise and I have a venue, my first question is which identity providers I'm going to give access to. Right, so because I don't want anybody coming onto my network. That's super important. But at the same time, I want to be frictionless for my guests, for my contractors, in addition to my employees. Right, so I do decide that. Now, clearly, the operator or the service providers must decide: am I willing to share my identity with this enterprise? Right, so that's sort of the next question. Clearly, the device and the infrastructure needs to enforce that policy. Right, so that's where that other pillars come in, and something like Open Roaming is the federation that enables this operator and the enterprise to talk to each other. So I think it is how do you make an easy button where multiple stakeholders can come in? That's exactly. So I resonate with Todd, except that if I'm an enterprise sitting here, I'm not going to necessarily say seamless experience is my number one goal. I'm not talking of the employee. I'm talking of the IT team. They're going to really worry about security first and foremost, and can I ensure that I can give the SLA to my key stakeholders first? So they won't compromise on that, but surely they will expand it, right? Because they need to. And this is what Raj was saying, right? Ultimately, even if I'm an employee of Google or Cisco, I want seamless access, high quality access, no matter where I go. So that's where they need to go, but they'll start with a posture of, I'm not going to open up my venue to anybody and everybody. I'm going to be really thoughtful about security and SLAs before I do that.
And so here we're getting that, both sides of this, the enterprise side and the service provider side, and we're starting to see this convergence of these two giant worlds. What I can't help but notice is that sometimes we use a slightly different vernacular, but we're actually trying to solve very similar things. And I think it's great that you bring up security, Greg, because when I think about this move to zero trust, and when I think about most users being not mobile, they're not sitting behind their desk, and I think about these services going up on the cloud, now the path between the user and that service, maybe they're at the enterprise, and maybe it's going through the enterprise, maybe it's going through through a AT&T access network, and maybe that cloud service is a service that's part of the business that's being run by the enterprise, or maybe it's a service like Office 365. And so these paths now traverse across different networks and different access in such a way that this has to come together so that you get this unified experience. And so it sort of begs the question, because we're coming at this from different angles, who owns identity, right? Who owns the identity? Because often identity drives policy. Policy drives what? It drives that quality of experience, but it also drives the security that Greg is talking about. And when I look at open roaming, isn't it a cross-pollination of identity? Isn't it saying that, hey, I'm going to allow you on to this enterprise access network using a service provider credential? Isn't that what roaming is this cross-pollination of identity? So how do we meet all of these needs? So I'm going to go to Derek. You see what open roaming does is open roaming a convergence technology, and does it help us solve some of this identity crisis between these different networks?
Well, I think yes, for sure. I think that's the key thing, right? Is that Raj was talking about standards, and you have to have a standard way to be able to have all those trains, or you pick anything, electricity in our homes, all these things required some kind of standard to be able to make it happen. So now I can plug on anything I want inside my home. I don't care who manufactures it. It's going to adhere, and it knows, the frequencies and everything else that it needs to be able to get on to be able to provide power to that device and how it's going to. And then I think that's the same thing when we're starting to talk about access networks and all of that as well. Is we have focused so long on that whole stack, and unfortunately there's not a lot of standards across to all of that, and we're getting better in doing that. We've done some evolutionary things on the coexistence that both Todd and I have talked about with CBRS and LAA, but it's still separate, right? The Wi-Fi access point still does not sees the LAA as noise. It doesn't see it as an access network that somebody's trying to connect to, and that's a challenge, and vice versa. And so those are some of the things that we've got to work on. Is this whole idea of spectrum? We can go the old route of just let's license it all, and then that way you control the whole spectrum, and you're going to put your proprietary way of being able to manage, slicing and all of that. Or we need to come up with a standard, and we need to get everybody to adhere to the standard, and then all of a sudden it can go across all spectrums, licensed, unlicensed, and shared. And so that to me is the key. Even with identity, it's really just saying, hey, what are the things that we need to have, and then where do we go from there to be able to do it? And I think open roaming is a good start for that.
Yeah,
Raj is going to go for it.
Hey, Matt, and Derek, one thing I wanted to just point out is that I think the phrasing of who owns the identity is misleading, right? We think of it that way. I think the question is, how are you serving the customer and what are the relationships, right? The state has an identity for me in a driver's license, and Walmart has an identity for me with my loyalty program, and AT&T has an identity for me, and each of those parties may be serving me in a different way. And so my relationship to the mall that I'm standing in may be a direct relationship with the mall, or it may be someone else who's trying to serve me in partnership with the mall. And so I think ownership is the wrong phrase for identity. Identity is about relationships.
I love that. And one of the things I always say is when you look at somebody's phone, I mean, in today's world, nobody owns that phone. There's so many apps and so many different applications you're running and so many different identities that you're running. And at the end of the day, it's your identity that manages all those identities. And what we have to do is we have to create an opportunity for you to have, like you said, relationships. It's still me. I still have a digital twin that's me. That's me. It's my digital twin. But all those different things are the relationship that my digital twin has.
Absolutely. I think if you anchor in how you serve the customer, it makes clear how we as vendors relate to the customer.
Absolutely.
And to that point, Raj, as an identity provider and also a device manufacturer, we work to ensure that our device connects intelligently and securely to any network, right? And for us at Samsung, we understand security, we understand manageability, and that is evident with the Knox platform. But for us, the Samsung ID itself, right? That's an integral part of the Samsung story, right? It's the gateway to the world of Samsung. It allows us to provide 24/7 support, and it helps our customers kind of keep their Samsung devices secure and the information that sits on it as well, right? And it is, to your point, what makes your device uniquely yours, that particular ID. And then now, that is one of the key access points to OpenRoaming, right? So we understand this relationship that we have with our customers, and we understand the importance of that ID to them. And we have to find ways to make to provide ease in whatever capacity we can, and this is one example of that. And we've executed on this before. So we implemented the open roaming at Mobile World Congress last year in 2019, right? And it gave us an opportunity to not only talk about this conceptually, but actually see it work and see it being effective and seeing the end user get benefit from it. And that's ultimately what this is about, right? For this seamless onboarding, for this the rigidness of authentication, kind of eliminating that to make that process more easy.
Yeah, and I think you guys couldn't be more spot on. I mean, personally, because when I look at this, and I love this, I mean, really the identity is yours, right? And we have these different representations of this identity that provide different business context to how you're using it. And the fact that we have a technology that for open roaming to actually allow you to use multiples of those contexts means that you can provide a more ubiquitous experience wherever you are. You know, I can give another example. Say you go into some retail store, AT&T might want to make sure that they're getting a certain SLA to offload a user. Maybe they want to move the call over into the Wi-Fi in that retail store because it's got LED windows or whatever the reason in order to do penetration. But the retail store might also want to use the relationship to the person for their loyalty program, right? So here we have two identities that represent the same person that provide a different context to provide a business need. And I think that's where we're really going. And, you know, it's exciting to me to see some of the things that are going on over in WBA. You know, I can tell you, and you know, so I have to say thank you, right? Because, you know, when we did Passpoint 12 years ago, Samsung was the first one to actually turn on Passpoint in the live network. And when we did Open Roaming, you were talking about getting together at Mobile World Congress. There was Samsung, the first one to turn on Open Roaming, and people were experiencing automatic and secure connectivity boom as they came into a context of a menu, you know, using that identity to do that. So I would agree. I mean, in general, we're not saying that one identity is better than another. We just say they have different contexts, and what we're really trying to do is leverage them in a way that we can provide that best user experience. I don't know, Todd, did you want to comment from an AT&T perspective?
No, I'm going to borrow some of the wording that you guys are using, and I think the balance on our side, right, is making sure we honor the customer's request and answer to our stockholders, right, and delivering a profit. But no, I think it's been a very healthy dialogue.
All right. So any closing remarks? I think we can actually wrap up here. Any final remarks from anybody? Otherwise, what I'll do is I'll hand back over to Sarah. I don't know, Sarah, if you've been following the chat and Q&A. Are there any questions coming from our audience?
Hi, Matt. Yes, there's quite a few questions come through. Do you want me to raise them now?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, just bear with me a second. Sorry. You caught me on the hoof there, sorry. Yeah, so first of all, we've had...
I told you to wait before you went and got that cup of coffee, Sarah.
Just a long time without a coffee. Yeah, so just some feedback from the audience there, saying great panel, great discussion. Thank you very much. That was very nice. Just wanted to pass that on to you guys before we sort of just go on. One question we've got here is open roaming purely about authentication? Is there a role in deciding through which core network my traffic is routed? What if I have benefits such as free TV or music service through one provider? As a user, can I rank the order by which I want to identify myself and from there who carries my traffic? A long question.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit about who decides, and this is a policy component that I believe really has to be in some ways down in the device, because there's multiple decision points here. If AT&T is going to offload a Wi-Fi call, they want to be able to decide whether or not they do that handoff based on whether or not that network can provide a carrier class experience that their customer would expect, right? The user, if they're doing a data connection, may be concerned about, hey, look, I have this path on over here. Maybe it's through Wi-Fi and it's free. And I have this path over here that's going to consume gigabytes in my package. So maybe the user wants to have some say in this. And then the cloud provider, they might want to have a say based on the application requirement. And then the device wants to provide the best experience. So they're trying to provide the best experience. Maybe Derek, I'll start with you, because this is a really key question. It's can we actually govern the path through the network, and how would we accomplish something like that?
Well, I think that's where we're headed, right? I mean, we've done that with again, it's an evolutionary path. We've done that with QCI levels, right? We started saying, and in Wi-Fi we have rules that we can set, so we can say, okay, deliver different services at different quality values. We've built inside our systems to be able to provide this kind of capability. We've built this kind of pathing. I gave the example of the military example before, where we actually don't allow you to get to certain sites because at the request of individuals. So certain individuals with certain credentials can get to certain sites, and certain individuals with other credentials go to other sites. And so we have that capability. I think we all in our networks have that capability to be able to enforce those kind of rules, and I think appropriately so in certain cases. Bearing the, we all need to make sure that we keep the internet open and all that. But there is reasons to do so, and there's ways to do it. I think I think that having an identity and being able to make that choice, it's available today. I mean, you can see it happening today. There's, we have parental controls in a lot of ISP systems, and to be able to manage some of those, what sites you can go to or what routes you take to get to certain sites, and so we can do that. I think the more important part here is understanding how we build that is going to take some additional standards. And when you think about some of the standards that have happened across, industries, think about the movie standard with rating of content, right? And you think about some of these different solutions that come through, there needs to be some standards here. And this is why it's so important in my mind for us to be working together, where we have the ecosystem of service providers, neutral host network providers, vendors and manufacturers of equipment, and Google does everything. So whatever you want to call there, Raj does there. But the key thing is, getting all of us to work together to find those standards. it has to start there, and we have to reach across. So one of the things that I think the best thing that we do in the WBA is we have this group called the CTO group, and its main job is to make sure we're working with other standards bodies. So one of the questions I saw come through was, are we talking about open roaming with other bodies like 3GPP? And you bet we are. It's a very important part of what we're trying to establish, is this relationship between all of these different standards bodies and working together to make it happen. Because if we don't, you know, to your point, convergence isn't just about technology. It's also about business. It's also about relationships that we all have together. It's that collaborative, that all has to converge too, because in the end, we're all sitting on the device together. And so we need to be able to work together.
And just to second that, you know, the question asked about, you know, how does open roaming, how much of this does it solve? You know, in the Bay Area and San Francisco, we have 2 train systems that overlap and do the same thing. But for years, I'd have to buy a different ticket on one and a different ticket on the other. So BART and Caltrain both can take me to the airport, different paths, totally different systems. A few years ago, we got one pass, so I can swipe the same card at either turnstile and that'll work. That's the authentication. But there's still a whole bunch of other work. Get the schedules right, get the maps right, get the policies similar. Open roaming is like that pass system, so that one identity can work at the turnstile or different identities can work at the same turnstile. And it's part of a bigger picture. It's not the solution by itself, but it's a big step forward.
Hey, Matt, there's a question around, has COVID created any consumer behavior that drives convergence? And I want to quickly address that.
Sure.
You know, I started off saying like enterprise care about security. You know, what COVID and the new normal does is it completely, in a matter of 24 hours, reverse that, right? By forcing the largest work from home experiment ever. So I do think coming out of it, the zero trust world that you spoke about is going to be more of the norm. And that absolutely is going to want enterprises to look at convergence much more openly than we ever did, right? Like, because you sort of only trusted your employees to come and work in a certain spot, and you provided really good access in those spots. And so what if a guest had high friction, right? Like, they are guests, not my employees. I mean, that thing is now going for a toss. But flex work and remote work and everything. And so the world of convergence, I almost think it's a necessity. Right, like you coming into the new normal, you're not going to be able to afford running private networks and only saying to your employees, that's the only place where I would give you high quality experience. It's not going to happen. So I do think our hand has been forced.
Yeah, I love the perspective, Greg, coming from the enterprise side, because you know oftentimes when we come to forums like this, we see the service provider using a credential to do something that we in some ways become traditionally used to, and that is authenticating into Wi-Fi and extending their access network. And of course, the service provider, when they extend into that access network, wants to make sure that they can provide a good experience, and so they want to have policy around that, and that makes perfect sense. But what you just said, Greg, is hey, is the other way true? Is the other way true? And this is, you know, Derek mentioned we have a CTO group over at WBA, and these are the types of things that we're looking at. Because why wouldn't, with zero trust, the enterprise want to request a policy from the service provider? Why wouldn't the service provider be able to provide for example, a DNS service like Umbrella? I mean, all of us Cisco employees, we use Umbrella to protect us and to provide security. When I'm out and about roaming, why couldn't you pass that policy to the service provider and actually induce the same security experience that enterprise wants when you're sitting at work, right? So these types of things, they're bi-directional. You know, convergence doesn't have to be one way. And you know, to me, I'm quite excited about the fact that that WBA is looking at this. And then I'll say one more thing, and I know I'm the moderator, but you know, sometimes I just can't help myself. But you know, it's, you know, we talked about, and I really liked what Raj said, you know, a little bit earlier, but look, if we can put a federation in the cloud to cross-pollinate identity, then you know what? We can also federate and we can cross-pollinate policy. And if we can cross-pollinate policy, then we can push that information down to something like a Samsung device so that now it knows not only the quality that they're going to get per path, but the cost of that path. and they can know the requirement of the applications that are running on that device, such as that they can intelligently choose the path to meet the quality requirement based on the networks that are currently available to them at any particular time. So like Derek said, are we thinking about these things? We're absolutely thinking about these things. Is this some of the work that the WBA is going to really double down on? Absolutely. Todd?
I was just going to add one comment. I mean, I go to build because that's my background, but 4 jobs ago, before my Georgia Rand job, I was in what we call the ASG group in AT&T. Some of you remember it, and we built out the in-building space. You know, hearing Greg talk, right, it brings back the shivers of the cost to build out the enterprise space, right, cost per square foot. But the one thing that's going to, I think, have to happen, and it's starting to happen, some of our infrastructure RAN vendors are beginning to catch on, right? But as convergence truly takes place, they've been hesitant to build a converged physical platform where cellular and Wi-Fi truly converge in the hardware space. But I think as compute begins to centralize, we truly go to software domain. I think as they begin to have confidence that somebody's going to actually write the check for it, and we begin to build access points that truly are a blend of all of these components that we're describing here, and back at the centralized compute, right, whether it's at a head end back at a central office or Metso or somewhere in a data center corner in the enterprise space, right, being able to spin up software tracks that can truly run that convergence play, it will begin to make the enterprise space more affordable to do exactly what we're saying here. And so what you guys are doing here, and there's device and policy experts on here that I'll let them remain that, because I'm not even going to pretend to be that, but it actually will become very affordable. And credit to my partners on here, what they're doing in the device and the convergence space will give the infrastructure providers confidence to actually go build that access layer that's converged, because historically they'd go to Walmart to buy this and they'd go to Best Buy to buy this, right? We've got to change that.
And Matt, if I can,
go ahead.
I just want to quickly point out the word zero trust is interesting because it's a shorthand. And the truth is we still care about trust, but the device requirement has gone to as little as zero trust. High trust is still better, and most implementations of zero trust will still differentiate between different trust levels, security levels. And similarly, I think that we're moving to a world where you can have as little as very low quality. I still prefer high quality, but there's a place and a time for different quality levels. The devices on the Android side are going to get better at figuring out where am I on the spectrum from like really crappy to really good. And I can make use of a Toyota, I can make use of a Porsche, I can make use of a Mack truck. It's not just one size fits all.
All right. Well, I'll take the Porsche, I guess, you know. So, so Sarah, do we have time for another question or two?
I think we are pretty much out of time. So if we can just wrap it up now. We've covered, I think, majority of the questions. What we will do is any questions that didn't get answered during the Q&A, we'll do a response back and share that with all the attendees anyway, Matt. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. What a fantastic panel you've all been. Is there any other closing remarks you want to make, Matt, before we close?
I'll just say it's really great again to get this set of industry experts. I mean, again, I'm you know, every one of you, I know we're working to the same goal, but we're coming at it from slightly different angles. And so to have a cloud provider, a neutral provider, a service provider, a device manufacturer, a network, you know, equipment and infrastructure manufacturer, and to hear how somebody these things are coming together. Again, I think sometimes we use slightly different vernacular, but we're really, I think, coalescing on a unified solution. And I don't think there's anybody on the panel that didn't mention, hey, we're trying to make the world a better place for these users, whether they're doing their work, their play, their education, or whatever that use is. So I agree with you, Sarah. I'd just like to say thank you to all the panelists, and I wish everybody a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to close with a couple of remarks, if I may, just for before you all go. Once again, I would just like to share. Hopefully, I'm sharing my screen. I am. So that's great. Yeah, I would just like to thank our sponsors once again. And just to remind the audience that we do have 8 webinars in the series. We've done the first 3, as you can see here. Today's the Friday the 19th of June. Our next webinar starts on the 1st of July, and then they'll be running weekly throughout July. So I would encourage any of you, if you've got colleagues who haven't already registered, who would enjoy one of the webinars that are coming up, please go on and check out the agendas that we have coming up on the wirelessglobalcongress.com and register.